Good day. In this day, I'm going to talk about how to answer questions around failure in job interviews. And first, I'm going to talk about why would someone ask you questions around failure, right? And I believe there's three reasons for this. The first one would be it's an uncomfortable question, and they want to see how you handle pressure and pressure types of situations, because that's also an interviewing technique, right? The second reason, the major reason why someone would ask you about a failure in job interview would be to see if you had any major or interesting learnings that you took on some specific behavior they'd be interested in screening you on. For example, your decision making in ambiguous situations could be tested with a question such as, tell me about the time when you made a bad decision, right? Or your ability to deliver through challenging situations would be, tell me about the time when you failed to deliver something on time. Okay? Or your customer obsession could be tested through some interesting learnings you took from a major failure working with a customer, or failing to listen, or failing to resolve customers related issues, right? And the third reason, which is sometimes used by interviewers, would be candidates who can answer failure questions quickly are also far more likely to have prepared for that job interview. So some interviewers would also understand whether if you prepared or did not prepare for their job interview. Right now, second point would be how do you best answer questions around failure for the purpose of job interviews? If we go back to what I just said, the core reason why they would be interested in asking you such questions would be the learnings that you took from those experiences. So then if you take your job title, right, or the role that you're applying for, you would think about what's an interesting time when I learned something that was super useful in my professional development. Right? And you could go with all sorts of examples, such as for a software engineer, you learn the importance of clean coding standards and not to hard code variables because you had a major problem, a critical failure in your website, and then you realized it was impossible for you to quickly fix it because you couldn't understand you had a spaghetti type of code. Right? This would be for a more junior types of software engineers, so to speak. Or for a senior leader, you learn the importance of managing up by having a major failure to deliver on a mission-critical initiative due to a lack of trust and understanding, right? So managing up, right? Or a non-technical PM could talk about a time when you learn the importance of customer feedback through a feature which you thought through a major component, so to speak, with some features you thought would be interesting for your customers, but in turn, those customers were interested in some rather niche things which you could have queried for before launching the project, right? To be more specific here, I once launched a multi-rater surveying tool as an employee development tool for our customers in our software. And that development took around 3 months, and in the last 2 weeks of development, I started to trial those multi-rater surveys with some of our customers, thinking that, hey, maybe they would like to design the forms, the surveys, with more features, or maybe they would like, many more functionalities on how they invite their employees to fill in those surveys. When in fact, what I learned is that 80% of the people I trialed with were more interested in how the reports of those multi-rater surveys looked. And therefore, I had to postpone the deployment of that multi-rater survey tool by another 2 weeks in order to implement, beautiful reports, which they could print, they could selectively print, and so on. That's how I learned the importance of customer feedback by failing to deliver something on time for that specific customer, right? Now, also useful, if you want to give great answers to failure questions, would be to talk about those learnings for 50% of the time. So the second half of your answer would be with learnings. Okay, and I would challenge you, to brainstorm a little bit, because I know those learnings can be quite challenging to communicate if you make it a goal that it would take you 50% of your star answer, right? Now, the third thing is that with respect to failure questions, and this is a big one, is that you will never get asked in a job interview, tell me about the time when you failed. Almost always, those interviewers would reframe this in some other way. Some common ways they would reframe them would be open-ending them. How do you handle failure? Okay, hypothetically, how would you handle a failure situation, right? And the third thing would be one that's most dangerous and one you must pay particular attention to, especially during the job interviews, would be through a setup. Okay, so they set you up for a failure question, so to speak. For example, they ask you, Dan, tell me about yourself. And you would go with your elevator pitch, something you prefer, something you enjoy. Wow, that's super interesting, right? And I don't know, maybe have you had any shortcomings as of recently? You know, they would ask you a question which you wouldn't connect with the failure story. And what happens here is that if they set you up with an easy interview question than with a hard one which is reframed, candidates would have the tendency to open up during job interviews. For example, how would this look like? Well, when someone asks you, have you had any major shortcomings as of recently, you talk about, yes, I failed twice miserably in my previous role as a PM, and I feel like, you know, my boss no longer likes me, no longer wants me in my role, right? This brings me to the last point of this video, would be monumental mistakes you'd want to avoid in failure questions, because there are monumental mistakes which you should avoid, right? So the first monumental mistake is that you shouldn't say something that's obviously dumb, such as you got fired from your last role because you couldn't perform, right? Because there's not, I mean, probably there's some learnings there for you, but it's a bit dangerous. You know, the definition of a behavioral interview is they look at your past experiences as a predictor of success in your future role. Whereas if in your past experience 1 month ago you underperformed, that's a huge no-no for many interviewers, regardless of how interesting your learnings were, right? The second monumental mistake you'd want to avoid is to talk about failures which are irrelevant or inappropriate. Like, for example, I cannot find a job. Okay, so you would go for a job as a technical PM or whatever role you want, and what's your major shortcoming as of recently? I cannot find a job. Okay, you don't have anything interesting for them. Even if you had any interesting learnings, they wouldn't be around your subject matter expertise, right? So you should really pay attention to, and again, as I said throughout this video, find something, an event in your professional career from which you took some major learnings, right? This is the best way to answer it. And the last thing you'd want to avoid, the last monumental mistakes you'd want to avoid is to say something along the lines, I never fail, I only learn. Right? So there's people who answer failure questions this way, like they refuse to say they have ever had any failures in their career, which in my opinion is also a mistake, because it's impossible not to have shortcomings, right? Now, communicating in such a way that you are in damage control, that's something more acceptable. But long story short, I believe these are, of course, best when prepared slightly in advance. And keep in mind, you will rarely get asked, tell me about the time when you failed, but rather they will come in various shapes or forms and in the moments that you expect them the least, right? So I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.